Hello, Brad.
Hi, Jeffrey. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's as I mentioned before, we were talking going back to the G Plus days, the Google Plus. You're probably one of the more active people. You definitely were very active during those times in development, and I absolutely enjoyed following both the developments you're doing for RPGs, but also your art.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
So you were doing these biomechanical. You did a dragonfly, where it's like a dragonfly machine
Yeah.
combination. Like if you were to take and mechanically put together, I believe, like a dragonfly and make it into a flying vehicle, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, that's what I did. And at the same time, I did a wasp that was all mechanical and sort of dressed as in World War II pattern and iconography, like an American Jeep or something like that. And that I recently just got tattooed on my back.
All right.
Yeah. I
Well,
won't show it to you, but yeah, it is cool.
But one of the things that I think at the time that was I think you were enjoying the new hotness was the game Diaspora.
Yeah, it's not that. I think Diaspora came out before we started interacting on Google Plus. That came out in 2009, but it had a long period where it was quite popular. Yeah, we got a lot of talk mileage out of that and moved a lot of copies.
So you took two great tastes. You took Traveler, and at the time it was Fate, not Fate Core.
Yeah.
And you decided to put two great tastes together. So what was what was the drive to say, you know what, we've got Traveler, I want to do something different with it? What was the whole thing behind that?
Well, this is all a gang of people that have been playing since they were teenagers. But we've been gaming in just traditional sort of gaming, D&D and Traveler, maybe some Metamorphosis Alpha or something like that. All the titles that were out in 77, 78, 79, that's all we played. And then in about 2007, I guess, I started reading some blogs from people who were doing some more interesting game design work. The Forge was coming out.
Right.
And sort of parallel to that, Spirit of the Century came out, and there were a bunch of stuff. And I think all of that was percolating on RPGNet at the time. I'm pretty sure that's where I started to see all these new titles. So we grabbed a copy of Burning Wheel, a copy of Spirit of the Century, and some other toys, and I started tinkering with those. And once we got going with Spirit of the Century, then the light bulb really clicked on. We knew we wanted to play that system. It was delivering all of the hits that we wanted as adults. Now, now we're in our 40s and not kids, and we're looking for set piece battles and things like that. So it was hitting all the right notes. But we really just wanted to play Traveler. So we wrote this draft that was called Spirit of the Far Future, which was really just Traveler, pretty much hand copied the whole book and then tinkered with it, fit in with the Fate system. So we played that for a long time before we decided this should be a thing. And in order for it to be a thing, it was going to have to not be so obviously Traveler and not be so obviously Spirit of the Century. Unfortunately, Spirit of the Century came with the open gaming license.
Right.
So you were kind of granted permission as a designer. People often talk about the OGL from a player's perspective, but it's really about permissions that are being granted to designers, not players. You're being granted the permission to use this entire framework within generally clearly defined constraints to make your own game that would be similar, compatible, and use some of the same language. So because we had the OGL going for us, we only really wanted to play Traveler, and we dug the system. This mishmash of Diaspora came into being. And there were years of playtesting that were a hoot, some of the best gaming in my life.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is in general, its Fate seems to be more of the pulp actiony, and especially Spirit of the Century, the crazy. I mean, it really intended to just be wild, fun, crazy ride, the Indiana Jones or Johnny Quest or whatever, those types of things. But Traveler is pretty straight-faced in its approach. And you kind of, but you were able to make, I guess, a more serious or earnest game, maybe earnest isn't quite the right word, but out of using the Fate system.
Yeah, well, Fate hadn't really been well elaborated at the time. Like, we didn't have a Fate rule set to work with. We just had Spirit of the Century.
Right.
So the first thing that we were doing after playing Spirit of the Century was we were deconstructing it. You know, what is it we like about this, and what is it that we're on the fence about? We were kind of on the fence about the genre. That wasn't kicking it for us, but the system was. So that was the first thing we did, was really disconnect the genre from the system. And then it was just natural to make the system do the things that we wanted it to do. You know, it was mostly just a way of offering a different narrative for what a fate point is and what characters are capable of, and that sort of thing. Toning down the tone from that sort of pulp hero to the much grittier kind of traveler milieu wasn't even something we really thought about. It was just obviously a capability of the system to us at the time. If I was to look at it now, it would not look obvious to me.
Well, I think also at the time Fate, you know, it pre-existed Fate Core, preceded, so, and it was a more, I would say, a more granular, well, maybe granular is not a word, but it was a much more complex system. Like Fate Core, they really, what was it, Leonard Basalra? He whittled it down. So he whittled it down to, like, you know, bare essence, and then everything goes from there. But at that time, I mean, if you look at like the Dresden Files, you know, it's still a fairly complex game, and it's not necessarily the same. So I think you had more, but it seemed like when you did Diaspora, you also like pared it down as well. It does not have the complexity of like Dresden Files, let's say.
Yeah, well, I hadn't read the Dresden Files. I had never read the novels, never seen any of the media, so I wasn't interested in it. So I never actually looked at what they did with the Dresden Files. But my table was a bunch of professionals, and mostly technical professionals, except for Toff, who's a classics prof. Well, all of us pretty analytical thinkers. And the first thing that we did was approach it almost like an engineering problem, was break it down into modular components and generalize and generalize and generalize. Like, that's why the stunt system is sort of a list of the general ways that stunts work, and then some examples is how to specify them with some narrative punch. But we spent a lot of energy doing that, like really figuring out what the underlying skeleton of Fate was, without having any contact with Spirit of the Century. Just drill it right down.
Yeah, just deconstruct the whole thing. It's like,
yeah,
here's
some of it we left out.
Yeah, and I think you also, not only did you just have like the characters, and also but the vehicles. I've never played Diaspora, unfortunately, but I think the stuff you were doing with the ships, doing like electronic countermeasures and ships, like, you know, rather than just the simple, like, in a sense, you made it, I think, a little bit more, I think because of the system, the way you created it, it made more sense than the standard Traveler did, as far as the systems were smaller, the ships seemed more, I don't want to say realistic, but the ships were more realistic. And it seems like you're kind of going for, you're able to take it and create an opportunity to not only just do like normal character type stuff, but even ship to ship combat.
Yeah, well, there were a couple of different pressures going on there. One of them was that I just had a real thing for the engineering, and I wanted the ships to be as real as you could reasonably make them and still have a story about jumping between stars. So, I mean, even the interstellar travel is more plausible than a lot of interstellar travel because of this fact that the multiple systems of the cluster don't know where they actually are in the universe relative to each other. So the space between them being jumped by this faster than light technology, the slipknots, doesn't necessarily create the time paradoxes that it would otherwise, because there is no sublight path between the systems. So we're finding all kinds of little things like that to make it as plausibly realistic as possible. But the other thing was we recognized that we wanted sort of an old school game that broke down into subsystems. You know, your character generation subsystem, your guys fighting subsystem, your ships fighting subsystem, vehicles, like platoon scale stuff fighting. And when we started playtesting it, we started developing those subsystems as standalone games, so that you could make ships and spend an evening fighting ships against each other, and that would be fun. And similar with the platoon scale stuff, and similar with individual scale. So it's really those subsystems just kind of bolted together with some colorful text in the end. That's why they all play well, because they all had an almost equal amount of playtest time as independent games.
Yeah, if I remember, now you mentioned that, didn't Evil Hat borrow some of the quote ideas behind the platoon level combat?
Oh, I don't know. Possibly. We shared a lot of ideas,
Yeah.
you know, on RPGNet and on Google Plus, and I would hate to take ownership of anything that Evil Hat has subsequently.
No, I
produced,
thought he
sure
borrowed something. You're like, hey, a shout would have been nice.
There was a time when I might have felt that way, but you know, the bottom line is those guys were really running a serious business, and I wasn't. I really didn't care that much in the end. It took me a while to realize I didn't. You know.
It also, I wonder too, just like even musicians, you know, you like, how as a musician do you ever like get everything out of your head so that everything you write is like, you can't, you like, there's stuff that just floating around, you forget like everything else. It's like little pieces here, little pieces there, and they just kind of, they all come together.
Yeah, and there was a degree to which I think I would have been flattering myself that some of the stuff we did was just totally not obvious, when in fact some of it's pretty obvious ways to manipulate the system. And people coming up with it independently is not that big a surprise.
Yeah, one time I was doing more of my photography days as another city. I was having a different kind of class, but this other guy was getting into photography, and then I went and looked, and it's like there was some sort of exhibit somewhere I saw. It's like that was like one of the pictures that I took, and I stared at. It's like, no, it's at basically the same area that I was standing, shooting the same subject. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, this is stupid. Anybody could have shot. There's nothing really original about what I did. Even if it was original to me, I'm sure lots of people have gone and taken pictures of those, you know, lights on these pipes across on this viaduct. I mean,
for sure,
you know, but for a minute, there's a bit of like, it's like, after I thought about it, like, this is crazy. It's like,
yeah, there was a fair amount of that. And I mean, that was one of the reasons we moved away from Fate too, for subsequent games, was just, it was such a small pool, so full of people, that it was really hard to do anything that you could even pretend was original at some point, just because there was so much Fate stuff going on after Diaspora.
Well, the thing, because you were toying, if I remember correctly, that you were doing a Fate core version. Is that not?
Yeah, we played with that for a while. Yeah, we've bounced back and forth playtesting various second edition Diasporas. One was Fate core, one was strip the engine out and put something else in. But in the end, Diaspora plays pretty good. Tinkering with it didn't seem to make it all that much better, honestly. It's a good game the way it is. I figured at the end, just leave it alone, do something else.
Yeah, I get it. It's just kind of interesting as far as, you know, systems, what's hot, what's not, and in the people. And I think what I've also noticed is there seem to be, at least in the Google Plus community, it's like there seemed to be a large core of people who really weren't it. They like keeping things just very loose and abstract, and they seem to kind of fight against anything that would take it in any different direction.
Yeah, I mean, it was a complicated time, because you've got the social medium of Google Plus just burgeoning, with so many people suddenly connecting who didn't know each other. But Kickstarter hadn't happened yet either, so we were all selling stuff just through word of mouth.
Right.
Like, you know, we moved several thousand copies of Diaspora just by posting how clever we thought we were being on RPGNet. Like, that's it, just RPGNet. That was where we sold copies, and then directing people to Lulu or wherever they would get their copy. So yeah, I mean, it's a whole different social environment than it is now. Now everybody wants whatever's new, whatever's hot, and Kickstarter is part of driving that. I think it's just because people really dig throwing money at Kickstarter for some reason. You know,
I think there's a number of reasons. I think it's a couple things. You know, you mentioned it. It does seem to. It seems like it's its own social aggregator. I mean, it's a for whatever reason. It's not true everybody goes there, but it is definitely a huge marketing. It is a huge marketing tool for those who are putting material up for Kickstarter. I mean, that engine for suggesting things to people on emails, to notifying when people are going to launch something, to, I mean, it really is a pretty marvelous thing. So it is kind of tapped into, probably like Facebook does. They know they play a video, you're going to watch it. They know if you're going to, you know, that type of thing.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, I was kind of soured on it right away, although I wasn't really sure why. But before Kickstarter, so many people were doing print on demand, because you didn't have to mess with you didn't have to have a publisher, you didn't have to deal with warehousing, you didn't have to necessarily hire people. You would just make your thing, put it in a PDF, send it to Lulu, and they would print books to anybody who wanted them, right? There was none of this traditional publishing needed to go on at all. You didn't need a whole publishing infrastructure. You just need to ship a PDF, press a button, and tell people where to get it, and they'd get a physical book. But Kickstarter doesn't embrace that model at all. It goes backwards to the old publishing model. What you're doing is you're trying to get enough investment funds that you can create the publishing infrastructure to do your printing and warehousing and hiring and so on.
Oh, definitely for larger products, that is true. In fact, I think that's the only reason why companies can be successful now.
Sure.
Because I think the main thing too is, like, you don't have to outlay your cash up front and speculate. So if you're like, I think I'm going to sell 5,000 copies, but I don't know.
Yeah. But you only have to speculate if you're going to go through that traditional investment cycle in order to make the book.
Yeah.
Are you going to print 4,000 in advance and warehouse them somewhere and find distributors? That's all problems we didn't deal with, right?
Yeah, and what's hard
on Lulu and they print one copy for you.
And what's also created an issue is what's been hard is, like, if you do a Kickstarter, it's super easy to fulfill in the United States.
Yeah.
But the minute you start shipping from the US to Canada or overseas, it just turns into a nightmare.
Yeah. But I think another thing that changed with that is, I remember, and I don't know if this is true, because you know how memory is intrinsically flawed, but I remember at the time we were writing Diaspora, and just before that, all kinds of people were just building their game. Like, just one person writing, maybe they got a friend to draw for it. You know, their wife would do the editing. You know, it was just a really insular little chunk of work.
Yeah.
And one would do all that work and then put it out. And when Kickstarter came out, suddenly a lot of people who were embracing that kind of philosophy of development were suddenly really thrilled to be able to hire employees, you know, to hire writers and hire artists.
Right.
And just politically and socially, to me, that was not the direction I wanted ever to go in. I don't want to be an employer. I don't even want to run a spreadsheet for my business. I just want to sell shit and ignore it.
And occasionally you take out some money and go to dinner. We're good.
Exactly. Yeah. So so as soon as it became kind of a white collar job, I was not interested anymore. So Kickstarter was kind of a big indicator to me that to stay a game designer, I was going to have to become an employer, and I'm just not there.
Well, the zine community has kind of been thriving, and it's actually kind of fits, I think, in that niche where you're not an employer, but you're still using Kickstarter as a means to market and also to fulfill. and not have to outlay your cash up front.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
But
although
with
it's still a traditional investment cycle, right? Because you're pre-printing and
no, you may not print I don't print any of my stuff until the Kickstarter is completed, and then that's when I do the print run.
but I mean, you have to invest in a print run. Like you've got to guess that you're going to sell 1,000 or 500 or whatever.
Yeah, you set your minimum, but yeah,
Oh,
I basically set mine to break even. So, but the problem is I've already I've already outlaid cash. So it's like, even before I start the Kickstarter, I already have money and time invested. You
yeah,
could be,
see,
oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say is if you're real brave, you can fund it and then try and create it. That's fraught with the
Right.
disaster.
Our philosophy from Diaspora going forward is we weren't going to do this if there was any risk. Like I'm not risking anything except my time, because all the time we spent doing this was a ton of fun anyway. It was all play testing and writing amusing prose to read to each other. And there's nothing in there I wouldn't have done for free for myself anyhow. So we weren't going to risk anything. No one's going to put any money into any of it. And that was the philosophy going all the way forward. So maybe that's why Kickstarter never resonated with me, because it just didn't fill a need that I had.
Right. The idea that you're putting out a product that was sufficient itself, whether or not you had 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 people buying it.
Well, because we were using Pod, we didn't have to guess how many people there would be.
Right.
If only 3 people bought it, then only 3 people clicked on Lulu. Lulu only printed 3 copies. Who cares?
Well, I think you all
boxes of copies.
You miss you're missing out on all the stress that a Kickstarter can entail, just being on that journey.
Oh, very deliberately. Yeah. No, the biggest investment risk we took that failed was buying a huge box of black fudge dice, which we were going to give away full sets to anybody who sent us a copy of their receipt for the book.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, but we were only able to keep up with a couple dozen before it was obvious there's no way we could afford to ship dice to all these people. You know, we're basically spending the whole profit in shipping fees on the book that they bought.
Well, that's
so now I still have a box of black dice.
Yeah, that's kind of like Kickstarter, even though you're not. There's a number of people who thought they had a successful Kickstarter till it came time to ship, and they realized they had a failure.
Yeah, or even later. Yeah.
And especially
you oversell and realize you need another print run, but you don't have any more money for it now. Yeah, so anyway, that's the kind of thing I never wanted to get in on, and the little dice fiasco, which cost me $100, that was my touching the hot stove moment.
Yeah, I think we all have our levels of what we're willing to risk, and I think it's also kind of interesting you're talking about that. It's like one of the discussions has been on Twitter with some people has been about like writing and pay rates and what's reasonable. And I just started thinking about it, like if I were for me to write, like if somebody says I'll give you 6 words a minute, I was like, or 6 cents a word, I'd be like, in my mind I was like, no, it just takes me too long. It's not worth it. But yet I will write myself, and then in the end, when it all works out and gets said, I get paid way less than 6 cents a word. But
well, that's kind of the tale of the entrepreneur, isn't it?
Yes.
Because you're driven and work 18-hour days and inefficiently on coffee and not enough sleep, you end up paying yourself slightly less than minimum wage.
It's kind of funny how that is. You start thinking about the stuff that we do. It's like, if you're trying to make a business out of it, it's just like you think, well, you probably realistically want a person to be better off if it's just for financial reasons, just get a second job and just work at Menards for weekends.
Well, honestly, we never ever thought anybody was going to quit their job doing it. Like that was never an objective. We were hoping to have a good bottle of whiskey at the table every week.
Oh, there you go.
Basically, yeah. I mean, nobody was quitting their day job to write games. That was not remotely a consideration.
Yeah, I'm getting close to potentially being able to retire, at least as far as from the current job. So that's where I'm kind of looking for something not necessarily full time, but like it'd be nice to make a little extra cash.
Yeah, I'm not so worried about that personally. Mostly because my girlfriend's younger than me and she's got a really good job, so that's all going to work out fine. But
I've got a
But,
friend.
I have all sorts of artistic endeavors I want to pursue, and I might sell some of those.
I got a friend who's in a similar situation where he's actually close to 60, and he's wanting to go retire and go do and sell the house and go places. She's like, no, I gotta keep working.
Well, my girlfriend likes working, so that's an advantage.
Yes.
But she works for the government too, so she's got like 11 weeks of vacation. So
Oh yeah.
compared to my vacation list, it's hardly working at all anyway. So yeah, I mean, I'd like to get out of work in a year or two and pay the house off and just sit on my ass for a while.
Yeah. Do what you want. Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
so here's a question. So is VSCA, so you guys are still like, are you still working together and producing stuff, or is it kind of like
No.
dwindled in number?
Well, we did a lot of play testing up until a year ago, I guess. But it was kind of half-hearted. There was some writing going on, but it wasn't clear that we were ever going to go into a direction that would produce a game. So the Soft Horizon stuff is probably the last stuff that we seriously tested and produced. And then I haven't gamed at all since, I don't know, November of last year, I think. The rest of the gang's still gaming, but they're playing some published game. They're not developing something new.
Yeah, okay.
So, I mean, that might come back to me, but right now it's just not a priority. So,
Well, there are seasons of life, and sometimes those seasons come back around. It's just, how that is.
yeah, I mean, it could happen.
Yeah, there's no point in doing something just out of a feeling of obligation, or it should be something that you do out of joy.
Yeah, and I've also kind of broken down a lot of things that I loved about gaming into what I really loved. So I like writing. So now I'm just writing stuff, not necessarily games, but games, drive a lot of writing. Love painting some kinds of miniatures. I have stopped caring whether or not there's a game for them. Now I'm just paint
So you're
some
like the
miniatures.
opposite. There's a people that buy the miniatures but never paint them, and you're the guy that.
No, well, I don't paint enough to play a game at any speed. It would still be years before I had an army ready to play. But right now, I don't even have a game that's associated with the miniatures that I'm playing with. So I'm just painting them and making bases and things like that. But the art's always been the interesting thing to me.
Well, and I know it's like with Sand Dogs. I believe you did the art for Sand Dogs, right?
Yep, and King Machine. Yep.
Yeah. So that's been quite a beautiful work. I noticed that it's of course it's visual for those you can't hear, but it's just like I remember. I think during that time was that during Google Plus that you were working on that?
I don't think so. I think that's after Google Plus, or right around the disintegration of it, maybe.
It might have been around the disintegration. I remember you using reference photos for that armored truck. I thought.
Yeah. I think I posted that. Yeah, it would have just been transitional because I posted that on my blog. But I think I started the blog because Google Plus stopped. So where the blog begins, Google Plus ends. So there's a little bit of blur and overlap in there where I might have had some sketches going up on Google Plus, but they became part of a blog post on how I use the photo references.
Yeah, so it was it's just kind of interesting where it appears that the art and the content kind of, I guess, it appears they kind of work together as far as each other, inspiring the other. Is that the case?
Well, I've always designed primarily with a set of images in my head that I want to deliver as part of the game. So Sand Dogs, I had a sort of rough idea of some images, and then I would write some, and then I would draw some of the things I was writing, and then go back and forth and assemble the game around that kind of heap of stuff that was going on, with the imagery driving some writing and the writing driving some imagery. Yeah. So it was very iterative.
So on the tin, it says is a diesel punk plane of lost gods, scarce water, and Mercedes armored cars. So what's the so what is the pitch here for Sand Dogs?
I've always hated that, the whole elevator pitch thing.
Yeah.
I've always tried to encapsulate it. Every time somebody asks me what the pitch is for one of my games, I'm dead certain that whatever I tell them is totally different than the last time somebody asked me that.
That's okay.
So, yeah. So the whole idea behind the soft horizon, sort of the underlying technology that drives all those games, all two of them, is the idea that there are multiple planes that connect to each other in some fashion, and something totally different is going on each one. So each one could be a totally separate game, but you could plausibly move from one to another in some fashion. So building each of those games was mostly a matter of figuring out what kind of hook made this plane its own place. Sand Dogs really grew out of the imagery from Jean Giraud's The Airtight Garage of Jerry Cornelius, from old heavy metal magazines. And all those low concrete bunker buildings, desert scenes, a guy shooting a submarine with a bow and arrow, all kinds of misplaced technology, old aircraft where there shouldn't be aircraft at all that sort of stuff was kind of piling through my head. I wanted to recreate the feeling that cartoon had for me. And when I read about Jean Giraud writing that, he basically had no idea where it was going as a story. He was just drawing cool shit that he thought would be fun to draw, and then trying to connect it into a story as it evolved. And so Sand Dogs is not very different from that. It's a lot of imagery kind of glued together to make this pastiche of a world, and then some tables and things so that you can generate elements of the world that are consistent with that sort of artistic theme that's going on.
So I guess was the armored car, was that central to the whole thing? Is that like the thing that glued it all together?
It was definitely a big thing. The one on the cover is a misdrawn Mercedes armored car from like 1923 or 25 or something like that. And when I saw the image that I took as the baseline for that, then I was sure I was going to make a game, because now I had it covered. And that's usually when I start making a game, shortly after I build a cover.
It's funny because I don't put together games, but I've been doing different things. But it is funny how you kind of partway through, you at least need to get a cover to kind of at least it provides some sort of like it can provide an amount of inspiration and direction. And
yeah, and it sort of puts, I'm not sure how to phrase it. I mean, it puts a label on what you're doing, that you're constantly seeing whenever you reference it. I don't know about you, but when I'm typing in a document that's led by a complete cover and title that's roughly expressing what I want to do, I find that a compelling way to keep doing the work. The cover will change over time, but there's always going to be a cover.
Right, because I think it does just generate an emotion, at least for me.
Yeah.
And it
like I said, sometimes it's just one image I want to deliver, and the whole game is about one image.
It's kind of funny. One of my favorite books is it's called The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton.
Mm-hmm.
I think the whole book was written for 2 paragraphs.
That sounds like Chesterton, yeah.
and I sometimes I would go back. I just read those 2 paragraphs. It was the book itself was fulfilling, and then just going back and just sometimes I would just open it up to that page and just read those 2 paragraphs, and it's just they both, it stood together on its own. It stood together for those 2 paragraphs.
I'll give you another example. In Ontario here, there's a huge salt mine, and I was reading about it, and it's so vast that they bring heavy machinery down into the salt mine, drive it down into the salt mine, and drive it out to the edges of the face that they're digging, and they run the machinery until it dies, and then they just leave it there. Like, there's no money in trying to drive it all the way back out. This place is so huge.
Yeah.
So it's this massive graveyard of machinery that's between 10 years old and 100 years old, sort of scattered in the different branches of this mine, with the new machinery at the end still clawing out. And I thought, that's got to be a scenario. That's a Diaspora game, that, right? Being in this, say, an alien mine of similar magnitude, where dead machines are all over the place and still functioning machines are at the ore face still digging.
Well, yeah, because now
So-
we're dealing with in real life, we're moving more towards automation. And so, right conditions, those things would just keep going without people.
Yeah, but it was just that image I wanted to deliver. So that's like a whole campaign already almost written, because I just need to navigate all the characters until they get to that, to see that image, and then I'm happy. Games run that way, campaigns run that way, everything works that way for me.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like, you're right, because I know I've sometimes right, even like with a scenario or adventure for your friends, it's especially short ones, you kind of, you think of a couple scenes and you're like, okay, I got a couple scenes in my mind now.
Yeah, there's definitely something you want to describe to them or something, right? Or somebody's voice who you want to do or something.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And Hollow Point, that one says bad people killing bad people for bad reasons.
That is, I think, our most vastly underappreciated game. I still think that's probably the best game we ever did. Hollow Point is hilarious. And I think we oversold the violence, and people thought, oh no, I don't want to go there. It's too dark, too gritty. And it's definitely not that. It's much more, I'm not sure how to put it, because it actually derived from a friend of mine who was playtesting with us at the time, who was taking a lot of classes and things about nonviolence, like really kind of radical nonviolence, not just avoiding punching people, but avoiding emotional violence and all these sorts of things. And so we naturally started thinking about games and violence in games, because violence in games is really kind of a reflexive solution to every problem that's always kind of bothered me. And Diaspora has a lot of other opportunities in violence, but still all the subsystems are about violence, and that's always been kind of distressing. But so I was feeling like I would like to build a game that functions without violence. And I thought, first, what if we had a game where you could only be violent? Like, you can't reach for the dice unless it's something violent. And so all the characters are obviously awful. The only skills that they have are ways to be horrible to other people. And so that was obviously a game. But it's got a lovely death spiral into it, so it only lasts about 4 hours and then it's done. And there's a lot of little dice manipulation game on the tables that are reminiscent of Greg Stoltz's or like Rain. So there's some dice matching stuff that's fun, just in a tactile way to do at the table. But overall, I think it's a really, really fun and dare I say, although there are two critical authors, one of which is not me, dare I say, a smart take on violence and how violence works in games.
So I guess, and I know mechanically it's not like Fiasco, but is it kind of that whole idea of like Fiasco where things start out not being great and it's designed to just spiral down at that point?
Interestingly, no. When Fiasco came out after, and I was really inspired by Fiasco afterwards, I thought, I wish I had thought of that for Hollow Point, for things to constantly go bad.
Yeah.
But things tend to kind of go bad anyway, even though that's not the way we designed it. But we did design it so that, like, every time you go to a scene that involves dice, you want to be progressing the plot, working towards a solution to this mission that you've been assigned, whatever it is. And every time you go to the dice for a scene, the opposition gets a little bit more difficult. So if you spend too much time waffling around doing scenes that aren't relevant to your mission, then things will get so hard that you can't finish, that you'll get trounced by the opposition at some point. You just won't have enough dice to bring to the table. So there's a way in which it naturally ends, and it's kind of up to you to navigate an efficient path through the narrative to get the mission solved before your opposition just becomes too powerful for you to take out. So that is sort of fiasco-ish, but you can win it. Like you definitely can beat the missions and solve them before you run out of dice. But the fun element of it, the part that I loved, was if your character takes, I think it's 2 hits of the same type, then you're taken out, and you get to narrate how you're taken out, but you're out, and you have to make a new character. And one of our playtesters just hated that. He definitely wanted characters that lasted from scenario to scenario and got more power. Very D&D mindset. He needed that. So there's a little caveat in there for another way to do it if you want to do that. But what happens when you die is you bring in a new character, and that character outranks all the other characters at the table. And your first scene is giving them all shit for letting your other character die, which is huge fun, dressing down the whole team for screwing up so bad that somebody died or quit the service forever, or however they were taken out.
So like Mr. Big, you don't want Mr. Big, to come, and all of a sudden, eventually you screw up, and Mr. Big has to come in, is upset that everybody screwed everything up, and is
exactly. And now they're a character in the scene. So, somebody else dies, they get to bring in yet another even higher ranking character because dress down everybody else for screwing up that. But it only lasts like 4 or 5 scenes, so it doesn't get too ridiculous.
Right. But it kind of makes me think of, in some ways, like even like Tarantino, where things can seem fine, and all of a sudden things just start blowing apart. And you're right, not everybody in those die, but it just sometimes it's just the spectacle of, watching.
Well, it's actually a really nice, feature of the way the dice fall in that system, in that if you get a lot of high dice that match, then you're going first and you have some very effective effect, but then you have no dice left. So the natural narrative always runs sort of along the lines of, you've got all the dice, you're obviously the one in charge, you leap out with 2 Uzis, mow down half the guys, and then run out of ammunition, and then the next character's got to pick up.
Right.
So there are all these kind of peaks and stalls in the narrative of the violence that are huge fun, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how a lot of times we're like kind of even thinking back with people talking about running like the OSR style games. You could have a magic user with like 2 hit points, but they're the ones that survive because everybody else is acting crazy and bullish.
I've seen that both ways. I mean, I started playing D&D when I was 12, so I know about wizards with 2 hit points, and I've never seen one get a second hit die, honestly. So
it is kind of funny because the assumption is always that the people that have the big swords, the big armor, and the big hit points are people that survive, but a lot of times the people that have those are the ones that are up front making the most risks. And
well, that's certainly a feature of the kind of limited tactical possibilities in those sorts of situations. Yeah. There's only so many things you can do, and if you've got the sword, you're out in front.
Yeah, and it's also, at least it seemed like back in our day, it's like, and everybody kind of protected the magic user, at least until they got to a certain level. So there's always a bubble around these squishy characters, trying to get them to survive till they can cast fireball.
Yeah, this is probably very telling about me and my relationship with OSR in the end, but we really rapidly just stopped playing low level characters. Like I was probably 14 when we thought, fuck this, we're all going to start at 5th level and have some hit points and be survivable, and that fireball would be on the horizon. We'd be when we were going to get that. That was a sweet spot, like 5th to 8th level. We play that all the time, but below or above it, nah. I
think that's pretty much most, at least from what I understand. I'll say that's true because the internet's told me, but I think 5th to 7th is generally what people enjoy the most, and that's probably where the games quit, is usually around 7th or 8th level.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to speak for anybody else. Obviously, there's people who love all aspects of.
Oh no, they do. But I'm just saying but you're right. I think there's a point where the complexity of, there's also, depending on the character playing, but the complexity just keeps going up and up and up, especially I think with later games, that it makes it
Yeah.
more difficult.
Or earlier in the game, in early D&D, just by class. Like if you had a wizard at 18th level, you were just mired in managing your spell book all the time. What spells are going in what slot, where, how many do I have, or a cleric or any spellcaster for that matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it's just if it's
So eventually I started thinking, if level 5th to 8th is where the action's at, then why does the game even have all the rest of this? And that's when I started thinking about other ways to play these games. Like, sure, there's got to be a way to just play the good stuff.
5th edition, what they did is they just accelerated the point of going from 1st to 3rd. Like that's
Right.
your hyper acceleration that slows down. But there's other people that look at that and lose their minds.
Well, I'm glad they have another game to play. Not everybody has to play the same game.
Yeah, I don't know why they just don't know the rules. Just sometimes to say, you know what, if you guys just want to at least explicitly say it. If you want to start at 3rd level, start at 3rd level. If you want to start at 8th level, start at 8th level. Knock yourselves out.
Yeah, yeah, and it was sort of clear from the rules when we read them at age 12 that we were expected to ad lib the rules like crazy and make shit up if we wanted to. If we wanted to start at 7th level, it wasn't. Nothing said you couldn't do that.
No. We never did that, but what we would do, we would never violate that. I think that would have been, we never did that. But what we would do is we would hyper accelerate like if we needed 5th level characters, we just sit down and just roll up monster after monster after monster after monster.
Yeah.
Until we get enough experience points. Now we're ready to go. We would never have thought of why not just start at 5th level or whatever.
The bullet in the head for starting at 1st level happened probably when I was, it was with my friend Tim. So that would have been high school. So maybe 14. And he really wanted to play an anti-paladin. He wanted to play a chaotic evil character. And I thought, okay, so you can do that. So you can start this 1st level anti-paladin. But 1st level anti-paladin still got no hit points and doesn't have enough money for good armor. So he tried to be chaotic evil. And the bartender slap him down and he'd wind up in his black armor with big horns, washing dishes in the back to make up for all the damage he did in the bar. That's when I realized that's not where the hero is, 1st level. That's just not where I wanted to play.
No, it isn't. And you're right. It's just and even playing because I was running not Age of Rebellion, the FFG Star Wars, and the premise of that is 0 to hero. And like you start out with like no equipment. It's like a friend of mine is just like what's going on here? Why can't we have good equipment? Why can't we, start out being cool? Instead, we're just a bunch of schlubs.
There's this whole book of cool stuff that you can't have yet. Yeah. I mean, a lot of that's just reflexive. I think a lot of, especially game design for established properties, are mostly just kind of unimaginatively using what's gone before as a template for what to do next in game design. There's been some differences more recently, but for a long time,
I think that sort of stuff kind of, I think, also sells too. I mean,
this is progression in video games and things like that. There's a surge people.
Well, not even just that, but I mean, like if you're buying the license, if you have the license to publish Star Wars books, you're not going to publish a Star Wars book.
Yeah,
you're going to say,
I would. They kicked me out right after the first one.
Or say, no, we need to push as many books in the amount of time that we have this license as we can possibly sell.
Yeah. No, I would be a fan's nightmare if I ever took a property on like that. I would never do it. But I think that dealing with the property owner is probably a nightmare as well. So it's a bullet dodged, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it just depends. It's depends on the property for IP. There's another guy I know. It's just another comic book property. I mean, some of the smaller stuff, I think it actually can be very positive. But something like Disney or whatever, that would be, yeah, it would be. Yeah, I don't know. My sister years ago, she was a buyer for, I forget the name of the company, but they would license Disney products and they put them on sleeping bags and pencils and whatever.
Right.
And they would but they would have to send, but they had rules. So like Winnie the Pooh or whoever, isn't just that, it's just how their hands are. Like they could be this way, but they couldn't be this way. I mean, it's just like,
yeah.
It's
yeah, and you got to imagine that for an RPG property, that kind of sensitivity dives way into your writing, to the themes that you can present. I mean, everything.
Yeah, Matt Forbeck, he has he's been writing the Marvel RPG, and so I was like, early on, I had him on my podcast last year, and then later I found he was doing it, and I just wanted to see him come on. I knew he couldn't, but it's just like, I didn't necessarily even expect him to even like talk any detail, but he was basically, I cannot go on to any talk show or any podcast or anything. If you want to talk to me and it involves in any way this, he gave me a name of somebody at Marvel. So I emailed Marvel, hey, can I talk to Matt Forbeck? And a few days later, it's like, no, we'll let you know when you can, if you can. It was very nice. It was very nice. It was some guy who was just, he came across very warm. I mean, there was nothing corporate about it. The guy was just sincerely like, it's, when we get to doing, then we're going to evaluate, but I just realized it's a no. It's like, I'm not. No. Esquire magazine, yeah. Jeff Jones, RPG Ramblings. Who are you again?
Yeah, that's where I want to stay too. Who are you again? Is just exactly the response I want from people.
Yeah, well,
I remember you from something?
You look familiar, something, somewhere. Yeah.
If I'm forever just a diaspora guy, that's fine. I can.
Yeah, and I need to dust that off and have a look at it. I got another friend. I've interviewed before. He's big into Traveler, but I don't know if Lofton's actually heard of Diaspora or not. But it's something I kind of, and I think like you, at least when I was earlier on, I tend to be more of, I would play a system that would be tied to a setting tied to a system. I think, like this system this setting would be better in a different dice mechanic. And I would my whole thing was just port and error. I couldn't just take it at face value. It just had to be Blades in the Dark. I convert to Cortex. It's like
I'm the same way, but in reverse. I'll play a game and I can see all the things this system is doing right, but I hate the setting. Other people's settings just drive me nuts. I have no interest in them at all.
Yeah, it's like, so I took Blades in the Dark and kind of did a version of Cortex with that, and that worked out okay. But then in fact, the problem is I don't really want to go back to Cortex. But then I was looking at RuneQuest, and I was like, well, that would probably work pretty good in Cortex. Like, stop. That's insanity. There lies madness. Like, it's just
but that's the kind of thing that we do. I think, honestly, for a lot of us, that's the crux of the hobby right there, is what we hack games into doing.
Yeah, I mean, my first foray I recall was taking Moral Project, the mechanics as far as the combat and the characters, and then using that to play Traveler.
Oh yeah,
that was stupid.
But do you remember Hardmaster from Columbia Games?
I have never ever. I remember the ads. I never owned Hardmaster.
Super gritty medieval fantasy, with hit locations that go down to almost which part of the wrist you get hit in, and there's no hit points. They're just sort of degrees of disabilities from hit. Anyway, it's incredibly complex. Well, not complex, but complicated medieval fantasy system. Very, very gritty. And the first thing I did when I got it was think, how can I work firearms into this system? And then why don't we play Traveler with this? So you see, the Diaspora is not actually novel to me. There are a whole string of Travelers played with ridiculously inappropriate systems in my past.
Going back to just Traveler, that whole I can't remember the whole paragraph, but that whole Mayday, this is the free trader. That still just gets me. I mean, just hearing there's something about Traveler.
Yeah, even just that cold open. That's like the best elevator pitch ever. Is like, don't tell me about your game, just give me that paragraph. I want to play that game. It's somebody who started like knocking the logic of it. I'm just thinking, just stop. Stop. It's perfect. It's just like it is. It's just like, But I think it's to me, Traveler, it's like it still holds my imagination, and I'm not exactly sure why it does. Of all the games I've ever played, I didn't necessarily played it the most, but it definitely holds my heart probably more than most others do. For I'm not sure what it is about it. Well, for me, there's three things I think. One is the fact that for all of the science fictionness, the technology is largely just modern day. The practical application of technology,
right?
Yeah, you can get fusion guns, but most people are wearing bulletproof vests and carrying a submachine gun and a knife. So it's very accessible in that sense. And the other two things are character generation and world generation are fabulously rich. Like, you just got so many good things in a character generation. The random character generation system, with you just kind of nudging it in certain directions by picking careers, gave you characters that all had stories. And the world generation was just wacky enough that you would have stats that didn't make sense, but that you could make a story to make sense of.
Right.
Like Stone Age technology on a vacuum world. What the hell's going on there? And superficially, you'd say, oh, that's impossible. But then you start thinking, well, what if it's a society left behind in the sealed colonial spaces inside this asteroid? Now you've got a whole story suddenly just by trying to make sense of this random generation that didn't quite produce logical results. So I found that very inspiring for everything. Like, that's the nugget of creativity that just drives whole Traveler games.
But I think the other thing is there wasn't I think D&D, it's not necessarily prescribed, but there's kind of a prescribed play. With Traveler, as I tell people, it's like, if you're into finance, you can get a spreadsheet, you can get the star lanes, you can buy the GURPS or even was a Far Trader, and you can knock yourself out. It's just,
but the obverse of that is, and we're not going to tell you which way to play it. So I think a lot of people were just left kind of hanging without something to start on, right? Whereas D&D, at least, it right up front, it said, at least in the basic books that we got, it said, like, here's a dungeon, roll up your characters, try to get through the dungeon.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really straightforward. And you start hanging your own narrative on it. Why are we in the dungeon? What do we do after the dungeon? It's a really smooth introduction to role-playing games in that sense. You do something really obvious and you start to wonder what else you can do with things. The Traveler, they just throw you in the deep end. You want to play Star Wars with this? Yeah, you can do that. You want to do this with this? Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, and I think there's really, and honestly, there's really I don't think any of for the most part, I don't think there's been any of the early published material. I don't know if I've really found a really good Traveler adventure that's been published. Now, that's not saying I've read them all or read a lot of them, but it just, the earlier ones just did not provide guidance for a 15-year-old to run.
In that sense, no, they weren't good. No, I mean, there are a lot of them, and they have a lot of good kernels of ideas in them.
Yes,
but no, none of them really took you by the hand and brought you into the game and said, "This is what you're going to do. Now go do more of that."
Yeah.
Which D&D gave us for that. Yeah. But part of that, I think, is because the authors, they didn't really know what you were going to do with it, and they didn't care.
Well, and it was definitely early on. I think, things are getting invented. It's like, who knows, all the, like, I'm sure with Velcro, maybe there's a thought for Velcro, but maybe it's turned into things they never imagined. I don't know, but
yeah. Well, I mean, Diaspora got away with that mostly because it was bought by people who already knew how to play role-playing games. Like, it takes the same traveler shtick and says, I don't know what you're going to do with this. Here's your characters. Here's the space. Go nuts. Obviously, if you already know what a role-playing game is and how it can play out, then you already have ideas of what your character is going to do in this universe you've created, and you've made hooks for each other and so on. But if you were starting fresh, you'd be in hot water. You couldn't play.
Yeah, it is, and you're right. And there's a lot. You're right, because there's a critical mass. I think, especially even now with let's say D&D, there's a lot of things people can watch and kind of get the gist of.
Yeah.
And even if it isn't, Traveler, you can still watch something from D&D. It's like, okay, now I kind of get it. But back in the day,
I mean, all the videos of actual play, those are great examples that give people a leg up for all role-playing game.
All right.
They give you all of the assumptions that we're making when we write a game and don't bother to tell you actually how to play it.
Yeah, and I think with dungeons, it's easy. It's just point to point to point to point, and I think I think with science fiction, it's kind of like the same thing with movies. It's like some of the things that can, I think, probably create the tension is being stuck in a location, not being able to communicate. Once you start adding cell phones to movies, horror movies become less scary, or you can just snap your fingers and teleport to another dimension. There's no big deal. But I think,
I mean, that's the kind of referee advice that needed to be in Traveler and should have been in Diaspora too, which is, how do you start so that the characters suddenly have important and relevant choices to make? You're stranded is a great way to start.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things you can do. In D&D, you had a dungeon. You're going in the dungeon. Why are we going in the dungeon? We're going in the dungeon. And then you sort of incrementally increase your interest in the world, right? You start, how am I going to navigate this dungeon? Should I search for secret doors? Whatever. Then it's, what do I do with my treasure? Are there other dungeons to visit? What is this weird world with all the dungeons? You open up your horizons. Science fiction is often the other way around. Certainly with Diaspora, where you build this whole complex net of worlds with socio-political conflicts, and then stick the characters in it. And it's like they already have the broad strokes, and now they're supposed to figure out what they do day to day inside there. And that's not nearly as friendly a way to start a game.
Right. And you got a ship, you can do anything.
Yeah.
You could anything. I mean, as far as, like, I remember just the one from the adventure, or the hardback book, where it has the pyramid that you can go explore. Well, it's on an acid atmosphere. And the guy's like, it's like, that's my new ship. I go, I am not spending any time in that acid atmosphere. With my new ship. I will drop this person off, but I will not keep, you can call me when it's done, you're ready, but I am not landing the ship. This is like,
well, this is why so many Traveler games and Diaspora games often as well devolved into trading missions or something, right? As soon as you figure out, oh, your ship needs a certain amount of maintenance, you need a certain amount of money, I guess we better haul a cargo from A to B. Suddenly that's the game, is hauling cargo from A to B and back and forth, and incidental adventures along the way, which is fine. I don't think it's really what anybody intended Traveler to be, but that's sort of the way it worked itself out if you play that.
I think
for us, we just dove into fights. We just invented bizarre reasons to be mercenaries on alien worlds.
Yeah, Ken Haidt said, I think he was in the University of Chicago, and there were people who were like, getting like their master's degree in economics or finance, and it was for them, that was the trading.
Yeah.
I mean, they really, which is fine if that's what everybody wants to do. So, but if you, it's not, but I think what's also fun is, if you can get somebody to invest, like this is the thing, then, and what the hook is, then you can mess with the players.
Oh yeah, 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 for sure. You need some character, some player to say that their character genuinely really cares about X and they're willing to risk everything for it, for a campaign to really take off in a direction. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't, because you can't just as a ref say, okay, you really care about this, so you're going to do it.
Yes.
That never flies. They're immediately going to kick back and say, well, no, I don't care about that. We're going to look for, a better paint job for the spaceship or something.
I had a friend who was, there's like, the big thing for him was any sort of hidden knowledge, whether it would be an encrypted device that didn't really matter, or some sort of like magic knowledge. He would bite every time. I mean, you could set the dominoes however you wanted, knowing he's going to hit that first one.
Players like that's the meat and potatoes of any round. Yeah. Player like that is just gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had players like that as well. Yeah.
And you can create some very, very fun situation. I think what's fun about Traveler is that on one hand, you can do a different planet every week, so to speak. It's very doable. But I think, to me, like with Star Wars, which I find I do find annoying, both in the movies and also with the subsequent games, is that it's planet hopping all over the place.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it's like, it's kind of cool if you get a sense of a place. You just spend a session or two. Just yeah.
Like, yeah. I'm not a space opera fan, but I wrote Elysium Flare, which was the last Fate project I did, and it's a space opera game, pretty tongue-in-cheek, more kind of satirical, or a parody maybe of space opera in general. Just to see if I could originally figure out what people liked about space opera. If I could write a game that I wanted to play that was space opera-y, what would it be? And in the end, it turns out I don't really like space opera. But one of the things I wanted to do was figure out what's everybody going to do? Like, okay, it's space opera, but Luke had something to do and was sort of compelled by events. All of these stories, somebody has something they got to get done. And it's usually one character who's got an objective, and they're kind of dragging everybody else along. You don't really want to do that in a game. You don't want one character to be dragging everybody else along. So what can you do to kind of reconcile that? So what we did in Elysium Flare is one of the first things you do as a group is roll up your organization. You belong to some organization, and the organization has two features rolled from the same table. So you might roll, say, military and then academic. So if you roll military first, it's a military organization funded by some government for the purpose of defending or attacking. And you guys are a bunch of scholars in the military. And so the first thing the characters have to do is figure out what exactly this organization is and make sense of incongruous data, like old Traveler would do with worlds. And then each of those solutions would come with a problem that's intrinsic to it. So you start out having to solve a particular problem that's relevant to the organization. So all the characters belong to the same organization. So you're dragged along by the organization instead of one character who's got a job to do. And you start with something to do. So you don't have a dungeon necessarily, but you've got an objective to solve. And that's something that I reuse throughout the Soft Horizon stuff as well, because it's really a powerful way to avoid just having everybody adrift and wondering okay, we got a spaceship, but what do we do with it?
Yes.
So I didn't wind up liking space opera, but I got the organization's technology out of that, and that was fun.
So you could do, yeah, you could do like even more like modern, like conspiracy or
Oh yeah.
urban fantasy.
Well, I've got a copy of Sandbox here. Let me just drag it out and see what a short example would be.
I don't see it on your website on
Is it
itch.
not on itch?
Inevitable, Revolver, Scaffold, Diaspora, Sand Dog, Soft Horizon, Callisto, Hollow Point, and The King Machine.
What were you looking for?
Elysium Flare.
Oh no, it's not. I'm not sure why it's not there. Probably because it's a. I'm not sure why it's not there. I might not have been happy with it. I mean, you can get it from Lulu. I'll put it up another time, but yeah, I obviously was not super happy with it. I love the art in it, but
Who did the art?
I did. Well, actually, I had Juan Ochoa from Colombia. He did a bunch of work in there for me.
Well, I remember, if I recall correctly, that was a very impressionable time. I believe you brought him on for something, and he was like a co-collaborator. It was a project. What was that?
Yeah. Oh, that was early days. That was shortly after Hollow Point. It's got Jeremy Keller Friesen, one of the great Jeremys of the Google Plus days. I'm ashamed to say I've forgotten his name, but he and Juan and I started working on a project called Swallowmere, which was basically Hollow Point, except that the milieu was sort of the Dungeons and Dragons world, but modern after 1,000 years of technology and getting used to the fact that magic's everywhere and magic being kind of quasi-mundane and pervasive. But you playing badass troubleshooters in this skinny tie wizards sort of environment, orcs with mortar carriers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got some great art for it, and a lot of it we posted up on Google Plus. One did some amazing work for that. Yeah, but it never really took off as a project, unfortunately.
What happened?
You mean what killed it?
Yeah, like what was the sticking point? Was it a sticking point where like everything's chugging along fine, and all of a sudden it's like
it just kind of petered out. The writing, we weren't doing as much. We did a whole bunch of enthusiastic work up front, and then probably wasn't sufficient direction. The writing wasn't getting done, and started to lose touch. I think then Google Plus disappeared shortly after that. Yeah, I mean, I could go back to that in a heartbeat. I've still got all the files lying around here somewhere, but everybody's got real lives now to deal with. And mostly, I think in the end, what was really cool about it was the images that Juan was checking out.
Well, I think your premise was that if I recall correctly, I'm just I don't want to be putting words in your mouth, but the idea is that you wanted the art to actually to also inform the game, and that the idea was have the artists really just be the art being an integral part, not just of the final product, but making the product. Yeah,
definitely. And maybe from a project management perspective, that actually didn't turn out to be such a hot idea. We burned out on the ideas pretty fast. We had great images, but no really good way to link them together into something coherent.
That's too bad. Well, you who knows in the future, you say may dust that thing off, and
yeah, it could still turn into something. I mean, you got to like the image of two D&D characters in 3-piece suits with submachine guns and wands on a hang glider flying in towards a dragon or something like that. Or an ultralight. I forget what the image was, but there's some great images, definitely. But we were really into the whole skinny tie violence thing at the time.
Is that after Reservoir Dogs?
Yeah, major influence on me.
You could do worse. You could do far worse than that.
Oh yes, yeah. No, I'm not ashamed of that at all. That's definitely one of the big driving forces in building Hollow Point was certainly Reservoir Dogs.
I remember watching, I was watching The Hateful Eight one time. I was just watching little pieces here or there on the treadmill. And my friend was like, I told my friend about it. This is a really good movie because I don't really like, Tarantino movies or blood in your mind. It's like, I've been watching it so far. I said, there hasn't been anything. And then there was the twist. I'm like, oh my goodness.
I haven't seen it yet, but I did watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood a few months ago.
I've not seen that.
That has the same kind of hinge to it.
Oh,
suddenly it's a Tarantino movie.
Yeah. Have you seen Inglourious Bastards?
Yeah.
So the basement. Don't want to go in the basement. Plan wasn't going in the basement. That's not gonna work out. We got to go in the basement. He foreshadowed that and drove it in, and it finally happened. But Hateful Eight, I highly recommend. Oh,
is that right? I've been off and on Tarantino. I mean, I loved Reservoir Dogs. Most of the stuff in the middle I didn't really get into, and then I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I thought there were some amazingly smart aspects to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The way I was dragged through that narrative was really smart. Like, he assumed the audience knew what was going on, and then kind of tugged you in ways you weren't expecting. I thought it was really very wise movie.
I'll have to put an emphasis to make sure I see that. The Hateful Eight it basically forces a bunch of people into a single large cabin. And then it's kind of almost like, I don't want to say it's like 12 Angry Men or Lifeboat, but the idea is it's in this one space and things
That's
happen.
Your whole set. Yeah.
And that's what I think. And it's just, the actors are they're just great. So it was just,
I'll have a look at it. I didn't realize it was all kind of driven into this tiny set, like Rope or something like that. That sounds awesome. I like those kinds of constraints in a film. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I remember. Have you ever seen Lifeboat? It's an Alfred Hitchcock movie. And that one always, that was like I think my favorite Hitchcock movie.
Yeah.
And that
I put that one in Rope at the top too. And Rope is similarly all.
I've not seen that.
Tiny space. That's what the college kids who decide to murder someone to see if they can get away with it.
That's dark. That's really dark.
But the corpse is like in a cabinet that's constantly in the scene.
Oh, that is cool.
All of the conversation takes place right around the body, basically. It's pretty brilliant.
Well, and also he did the same thing with Rear Window, where almost all of it was just in this guy's apartment. He had a broken leg, and because he had a broken leg, he couldn't move.
Yeah.
And then he was sending his girlfriend in danger, or she was going. So that was kind of a brilliant thing too, as far as the constraint. And you couldn't necessarily see what she was doing, but you could see, like, a lot of times the expressions that he had watching her.
Exactly. Yeah. Everything that's happening to other characters happening somewhere remote where you can just barely see it. Yeah, I actually, to bring it back around to role-playing games, those kinds of films, I've always loved that sort of conceit. Really underscore just how different media, games, and film are. And I think efforts to make games that are like film are often really misguided. Film does something totally different. You could do 12 Angry Men as a role-playing game.
I think it works only in like the aspect of something like Fiasco, where one guy said
really tight.
Yeah, and it has to be crafted for that experience, because otherwise but those don't necessarily work great for a sort of long form. Like,
no, you can have a game where Lifeboat is a session, but not the game per se.
Right.
Or not the campaign.
But not the campaign. And in fact, even one guy I had on, he was stating that he doesn't think, I can't remember, but to him, that's not really an adventure. That's just more of an event, or a nice, I forget the term he called it, but he doesn't really consider it like a role-playing game. That's just an activity. That's what he called it.
Yeah, I don't like to just anything.
You don't like to what?
Just and just a
Yeah.
role playing game. Just um, I don't think taxonomy is interesting. I guess ultimately,
It
you want
was
to call
kind
it
of
a role playing
it,
game, it's fine.
it was interesting. I think it's kind of interesting to I find it interesting to discuss, but in the end, it's like I still enjoy playing it either way. It's still fun. But
Yeah, or just if you want to call it something different, okay. That
yeah.
thing that you just named, that's what I like.
I just like the idea where things can tilt and twist, and I think it's what we like about the Coen brothers films can be that way, and Tarantino to a certain degree can be that way.
Well, Fiasco was a major eye opener for me as to what a role playing game could potentially do. I mean, that's aspirational. I'd love to be able to pull something like that off. I think that's a really wise game.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to play it much. They revamped the game and made it into a card based game rather than got rid of the dice.
Well, that simplifies things. That's probably a good move.
It does. I played it once and I just realized I need to watch the as we talked before about the actual play. It's like I should watch an actual play, but it is kind of fun where you can have those crazy things happen that you can't foresee in the beginning, and in the end, it's satisfying to.
Although we played the ice station one several times, and every time somebody gets buggered by the polar bear. So there's things that you do.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. So anyway, yeah. So just don't go near
the polar bear. Or at least be the last. Don't be the last person to bring the polar bear into the scene.
Yeah, you're better off if you see the polar bear coming. Just douse yourself with chum and just pray, just end your life. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So what sort of things, if you were to, is there anything in the media or that you would, if you were to start get the blip of inspiration to try and create a game, what would it be now, do you think?
That's tough. I have absolutely no inspiration to create a game right now.
Is there a media that it's caught your attention now? Is it a certain type of genre, a certain type of
that's a tough one. Not really. I've been rereading a lot of old novels. I don't watch a ton of TV and film, honestly. I still love rereading Ian M. Banks stuff. I would love to be able to pull off something in the vein of the culture novels. But I'm not sure that's possible. You kind of have to have exactly the right people at the table, I think, to make it work.
Yeah, I guess that is kind of the problem too, right? Because a lot, like like say Call of Cthulhu, it even though it's very popular, it does take a certain mindset for that to play it and to make it work.
Yeah. Like if you're playing a Banks novel, you really want. You think of some of the. If you're familiar with Ian M. Banks, are you?
I'm familiar with the names. I've never read any of Ian Banks's books.
Okay. Some of the most exciting scenes are the rare scenes where a ship, which are all piloted by these enormously smart AIs, vastly more intelligent than humans, does something violent. And there's a relatively short description of the combat that takes place in fractions of a second.
Right.
So millions of decisions are being made and so on. But if you were going to play in that milieu, you would want to be able to play a ship. And that's fraught with all kinds of difficulties in a role-playing game.
Well, the Mindjammer
capability.
Have you read Mindjammer by the dogs are crazy? Have you read Mindjammer by Sarah Newton?
No.
So she took Fate Core and she kind of ran with it, and it's kind of a I think in the idea that I don't know how to describe it, but it's definitely, it would imagine like if you were to take the complexity of, I don't want to say go off all the way to T5, but the later like Traveler, and try and then take the Fate core engine and stretch it on top of that framework. That's what she did.
Right.
But she also, but the idea is you can be ships. You could be a living ship. You could be a program. You could be a lot of
Right.
different.
So in the Banks novels, there's often a lot of interaction between the ships and just people. So you do wind up with kind of a superhero disparity problem. You know, how do you make Lois Lane as interesting to play as Superman? How do you make them interact equally in narrative power within the scene? Or do you just always play the superhero? Or do you just always play the common person? So those are, I don't think that those are insurmountable problems. I think those are the interesting part of maybe doing a property like that. But as soon as I dig into it, I don't have the energy. I'm just not there for it anymore, I don't think. I'd rather just read the book again.
Yeah, and I think again, it's definitely hard because, you know, the atmosphere that a book can create is it's easier to, I mean, the author can generate that, but in order for that same atmosphere, you've got to get everybody to buy into that. It's hard to manufacture that through.
Well, it's something like a Banks novel. Everybody's got to know it pretty well too. Like, you know, there are certain expectations about how these minds would behave, what their interests and objectives are, and you could write all that down somehow or integrate it into the rules of the game. But it would really help if everybody just sort of all read and loved the novels.
Well, it'd be like somebody like never seeing Star Wars and playing in a Star Wars game. It's just like, or whatever it would be. There's certain tropes, there's certain things, there's things you don't do. You know, it's just I could see where.
Yeah. I think it's a bit simpler though in Star Wars. You can always
more people.
say,
well, more people know it. Everybody knows it. It's ubiquitous. So
but I
everybody
mean,
knows.
even if you didn't know it, it's kind of, you know, if they play D&D, it's like D&D but with laser guns, and there's definitely good guys and bad guys, and you're a good guy.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So there's a lot more nuance in well, it's kind of like even with yeah, there's a lot more nuance going on, especially with the characters. And you say, especially when you're dealing with artificial intelligence and ships, it kind of is.
And some of the things that are fun about the media are not fun things to do at the table necessarily.
No, right, because they're two different things. And it's yeah, exactly. And it's hard to create that, like say that atmosphere. It's kind of like even like trying to create a horror or, you know, dread. At the table, it's often very difficult.
Yeah, it might be better just as not so much a role-playing game as your other interviewee would say, but just an event or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
A managed scene of some kind, you know, something with less scope than the role-playing game campaign.
Yeah, because I think it is just definitely hard to portray. I mean, I think there are ways of doing it, and I think like turning down lights. I think I've done that before. You know, there's ways. You have to make sure people are limiting their humor, because you're just one Monty Python joke away from just you know.
Well, I mean, it's tangential, but you could probably get away with that in a Ian Banks science fiction. Wouldn't be too weird for your ship's name to be a Monty Python reference.
No, that's cool. I remember, so I was playing in a convention game. So this guy was running a time traveling game, but using it was Villains and Vigilantes, but he took the Dralosites from Star Frontiers, and this Dralosite was almost like a druggie, but he received like cosmic consciousness and he made some mistakes. And so he was kind of having the characters go and fix it. But he had like 3 different games. And each game 1, game 2, game 3, they were all in different, they're on different times, you know, it's like sequentially. But then he did it a couple different times, but I ended up playing in like the first game, and then like the third game. And so it's like the same character he'd be watching would be acting completely different. In fact, I changed my character to being African-American rather than the standard, I can't remember what he's supposed to be. And it just, the idea that everything could change that drastically between games, actually, I think kind of added the.
That's actually pretty fun. I like that.
But what I thought was kind of interesting is the character went back to the 30s. And the idea was this alien Dralocyte, he basically took Al Capone and sent him to Russia, become, radicalized by Stalin, and then gave him superpowers. And so
now you've got me thinking about games I could write.
So then
that's actually a pretty marvelous idea. That you've got this time traveling game where everybody can time travel. You wind up doing these episodic sessions in time travel, but every time you sit down to the table, you have to rule some fundamental difference for everybody's character.
Yeah,
like change species or whatever, because everybody else is time traveling too, and so somebody has done something in the past that has changed everything about your characters in the future. Now you're a woman. You're a humanoid uplifted gecko, and you have to make sense of this before you go on your mission to, run rum for Al Capone.
Yeah, it's the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you only experience the tail end of it, not the butterfly.
Yeah, and the idea is your consciousness still is it's tethered. So now your consciousness is tethered. It's just your form changes.
Yeah, you still sort of vaguely remember not being a gecko, but but you just got to run with it because this happens all the time.
And what was funny is because the way we played it, the other people played in a different order, so they knew what happened in the past.
Right.
But I knew what happened in the future, or so. It was just weird. It's like the characters played with characters, and the same players were in a different game that I wasn't in. And it's like the characters combined in such a way, like I'm from your future, but you're from my past. So it was just kind of a surreal, fun moment that only can happen at a con game, I think. I
want to write that game. I just want to jolt you between sessions like that. That sounds like fun.
That guy, he had me laughing so hard. Especially the first game I was in with him, with the Al Capone. My eyes hurt. I was crying so much. My eyes hurt from crying.
Well, those are the best games, honestly. I've played lots of serious games and complicated games and carefully directed campaigns, but the ones where I just flat out laughed most, those have been absolutely the best. I will still tell that story of Tim's anti-paladin washing dishes, because that was one of the best games I ever played, and I was 14.
It is funny, those things that it is funny because the idea is that we go into this not knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's just, and you're right. And there's times where everything comes together in a way that's just like magical.
Yeah. And when you've got the bug to design things, you're constantly on the hunt for ways to generate that magic.
Yes.
And that is profoundly frustrating. I'm not sure there's a way to do that. Like you can increase your statistical odds, but you can't always get it. Sometimes it just shows up out of nowhere.
Well, I think there's a number of things. Obviously it's the chemistry of the players, chemistry of the GM. And I think it's just I think it's also people's willingness to take risks and do things and not be punished for those. So, you could have punished him by doing other things, but you're like, you know what? And he was good with it, apparently. I assume he was. I don't know.
Well, honestly, as a game, it didn't last, but that scene was worth everything.
Yeah, and I think that's the ways with a lot of things. It's just like, even for me, it's like, I can remember games I've ran, just memorable scenes that we had one scene where, it's running late. I need to wrap this up. He's fighting a giant ape on top of a cliff. Roll the dice. You succeed, you throw the ape over the cliff. You fail, it throws you over the cliff. Everybody's watching, everybody's looking at the dice, they roll, it's counting all the stuff up, and it's like all of a sudden it's like the chances were low, but he succeeded, and everybody's like cheering and everybody's excited. It's like that only existed with that group of players willing to take that risk, and it
at that time in that space.
Yeah, but if he would have got thrown over the cliff, maybe they would have laughed too, and it would have been memorable. But but that's not every game though. Yeah. So I guess.
But as a designer, you want it to be every game, right? That's your objective.
Well, as a GM, you want that to be every game.
And as a player, but hopefully the designer is helping you out as a GM.
Yeah.
Ideally, the designer is providing the tools that make that happen. And again, Fiasco is the gem there. Fiasco is the one that pulls it off almost all the time.
Yes, and it's because that's just what it does. Anyway, well, Brad, I think we're hitting the time-space continuum.
Yeah, I'm off for bed soon.
Yeah, it is. You're in the future. I likewise. My staying up when I wake up at 5:30 in the morning on my days off, it pretty much signals the end of me staying up late.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, thanks for joining me. I've been actually been kind of excited to have you on for quite a long time. I'm glad we finally got it to work out.
Oh, thank you. That's very flattering, Jeffrey. It was really a joy to be here.
Yeah, so I'll have to have you on again, and until next time, you just take care.
Well, I'll try and have something to talk about that's new rather than 12 years old, 13 years old.
It's all good because it's all fun and it's all rambling. So
yeah, and it's all still getting played too, which is pretty wonderful.
Yeah, and I'm definitely gonna have to dust off the I need to go find a hard copy now. I think that's my mission. My vision quest is to get a hard copy of Diaspora. So I know it's out there in the wild somewhere.
Well, it's always available on
Oh, that's right, Lulu. That's the place I need to go. Okay, so I'll put Lulu.
Grab a copy of. You can grab a copy of Elysium Flare there too for that.
Yes, Elysium Flare. In fact, all the books I assume you have up there.
Not everything made it into print on demand, but a lot did.
Okay.
I think Drive Through RPG has a lot of it too. It's just Itches where the bargains are. Lulu's where the hard copy is.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, Brad.
My pleasure, Jeffrey. Thanks for having me.